Welcome to Fashion Designers Get Paid, a podcast for burnt out fashion designers who want to ditch the toxic rat race, say bye-bye to backstabbing bosses, and work with brands who value and respect them. I'm your host, Heidi, and I believe that you can do things differently in your fashion career. Because the truth is, most industry jobs will underpay and overwork you, and having your own brand is far from profitable. Let's also be honest, most of them fail. So if you actually want to, be a fashion designer and get paid, the best way to do it is as a freelancer. Now, maybe you've been told that brands don't accept remote freelancers, or that freelancing means being an exploited temp employee working full-time without benefits. Or to work freelance, you have to be a rock star expert with all the skills from design through development. I'm going to show you that it is possible to be a real freelancer in fashion, work remotely with brands you love, and make money, even if you're terrified you don't have all the answers. You got this, and I'm here to help you do it. In this episode, I'm talking to Rachel Batterbee, the owner of Guided Makers, an apparel development agency. Rachel started her freelance career after 25 years in the fashion industry, and she built up to so many clients that she decided to start her company. In our conversation, she talks about the specific strategies that she used to get her first few clients, how she continued to grow and get consistent work and income, and how she started hiring other freelancers. She shares tons of great tips on leveraging LinkedIn to land projects and grow her network. On the other side of the table, Rachel also shares what she looks for in freelancers that she hires, as well as some of the good and bad experiences that she's had. So whether you're an established freelancer looking to grow your team or you're trying to get more clients, there is so much advice in my conversation with Rachel. Let's get to it. Well, welcome, Rachel, to the podcast. I'd love to start out by having you introduce yourself and letting everybody know who you are and what you do in the fashion industry.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So, my name is Rachel Batterbee, and I am the owner of Guided Makers, which is an apparel development agency slash consultancy, that we help brands of all sizes and stages bring product to market. So my background, I've been in the industry for about definitely over 25 years. So a lot of experience. And I actually started in the industry on the supply side, working for suppliers. So that's kind of where my teeth, understood things like timelines and communication and overall process. And then I moved into brands and have worked with some larger brands such as Marks and Spencer in the UK, and then moving to the US, worked with Timberland and LL Bean, are the larger brands, and they really, really gave me that full experience of the end-to-end process with a focus on apparel. And in all of that, I also have touched on areas such as merchandising, which is another key element that comes into the process, sourcing, really done a lot of work around the sourcing world, and also been able to play with some of the creative things and get visibility and exposure to that too. Yeah. So my experience has really been very big picture, well-rounded, and not solely focused on one area, which is what I believe product development is very much big picture.
Yeah. So how did you first start Guided Makers? Or maybe it started like before it was Guided Makers. Did you start out doing like independent freelancing just sort of as like a one person? Like how did this whole path in your career begin where you went from, working with LL Bean and these larger brands to being an independent consultant or freelancer?
Yeah. So that was interesting. I opted to step away from corporate. My job was evolving into something I didn't want to do. And I'd had some awesome experiences where I was a much bigger picture thinker. So I was like, okay, now's the time for me to step away and decide what's next, knowing what resonated with me. And then while I was figuring that out and trying to understand what was going to be next, I had a lot of people reach out, connecting with people, grabbing coffee, and invariably towards the end of that conversation, a little bag would come out from somewhere and they would say, so I've got this idea and I was wondering if you could help. And I was like, okay, I'm sensing a theme, I'm sensing a need. And that is essentially what set me up. I was like, okay, people need help. People have
Yeah.
ideas and people don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So that was me kind of getting off the ground and starting to share my knowledge and figure out what that looked like. How was I going to do it? This was all pre-COVID, so the concept of
Okay.
working remotely from product was a little like, how people gonna
Less
like
common.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, less common. There was this whole mindset of like you had to be there. But anyway, it worked. There was plenty of people around me. And then there were other people then starting to reach out. Oh, hey, I'm just starting to work with this brand. Can you help navigate this? Or hey, we've got a sourcing question here. So just word gets out there,
Yeah.
and that is how it started.
Okay, but
And that was pre-guided makers.
that was you just working as an independent person.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Well, I know the way this stuff typically works. Like, oh, I just started having coffee with people and everybody was then
Mhm.
asking to hire me or can I help with this project or I have this idea, right? There's usually a
Yeah.
little bit more nuance to it than that. What did that process exactly look like for you to start getting those first few clients? Had you updated on LinkedIn? Were you reaching out to people directly to initiate these conversations? Like, walk us through a little bit more of the detailed nuances that went on with that beginning stage.
Yeah, so yeah, it was about letting people know. You have to let people know. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, and we say this to our clients too. We can make product to do whatever we're doing, but unless we've got that confidence to kind of put it out there,
Yeah.
which is hard for a lot of people, then what we're doing just stays in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So yes, it is socializing it, using your networks, putting on LinkedIn. I created just a landing page for my services as a
Mm,
website. It was really something very basic, but it had to be a place for people to go.
yeah.
Because in this world, people, Google, look you up, making sure that my experience, my LinkedIn profile was all up to date. I was got great testimonials on there from people I'd worked with.
Yeah.
So yes, definitely a lot of all that. I'm well connected in the industry,
Yeah.
so that really helps. So my network is already pretty large and respected. So that is great. So people would be comfortable to reach out or like refer on. The other thing I did, which was a bit of a happy accident, and I didn't intend for this to happen. It wasn't my intention, but I was also applying for jobs at the same time. It was like, okay, well, this is happening, but then I see this opportunity.
Mm,
And so one job I applied for, I could totally do it, but the fit wasn't right. The company wasn't right for me. The location, there was a lot that wasn't right. And they were keen to offer me a position. But after dialogue, and it was like, look, this isn't going to be right. I'm not going to be the best fit for your company and vice versa. How about we consider a freelance opportunity? And I could
yeah.
lay it out that it was
Yeah.
affordable. I could get this specific project done for them. And so essentially what I did is I seized an opportunity and I turned it around for it to support a freelance. It was up to them then at that point whether they wanted to do that. And they were like, oh, actually that works and we
Oh,
would love to have
wow.
your skill set.
Yeah.
So that was like a slightly bigger company. They
Yeah.
wanted me to do something very specific. And I just kind of slid in there and I did that for 6 months, which was a way better outcome than me like either shoehorning myself into their company and something that I knew that I didn't really want
Yeah.
to do or it wasn't the right fit.
Yeah.
But short term to help them through, it was great. So it was definitely seeing an opportunity, turning it around, and then making it fit kind of like my new desired path.
Yeah. And was that like a real remote freelance relationship or did you kind of go on site for those 6 months and you were working full time with them, but just not as an actual employee?
No, it was pretty much remote. They're
Okay,
about
great.
an hour or so from here.
Yeah.
So I would maybe go down once a week,
Okay.
twice a week,
Yeah.
but for the rest of it, it was remote.
Okay.
So
Great.
it was slightly different. It wasn't all product development. There was a little bit of like looking at their assortment process was a big thing, the product development process or
Yeah.
concept through to commercialization. it actually even wasn't an apparel, but the process applies to
Oh, okay.
everything. So I could look at the process and make some recommendations and talk to the team and things like that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite different. But yeah, it's all about seizing an opportunity and pitching it and then taking it from there. How do you make something work and maybe suggesting to someone there's a different way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk to us then, like, when did you start building out guided makers? Like at what point? So you said you started pre-COVID. When was that about?
The Guided Makers actually launched July, I think, of 2019.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess it's coming up to what,
4 years.
4 years?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
when did you start
So
freelancing on your own?
2017.
Okay. So then you launched Guided Makers about 2 years later. Like, tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about that and how did it start building out to be bigger than you?
Yeah, so the Guided Makers came about through networking, essentially, and meeting people. And it did start with a business partner, which was more focused on the technical side of the business.
Okay.
And so it was like a melding of two skill sets for apparel development. So that's how it started. It was like, okay, how can we make these two skill sets work together in a more holistic view and way for clients? So
Yeah.
that's essentially how it started. It's now I own Guided Makers, and some of these specialized skills are actually managed through a network of freelancers.
Yeah.
It's actually easier and more efficient that way. And then the clients get highly specialized skills to their product.
Yep.
So, and it's the same with design as well. So managing a network of freelancers in different areas.
Okay.
And Guided Makers has just really grown from the outset. It's just through connections, network, referrals, job leads onto job. And what's happened is it's really grown into something more than just product development. Product development is concept to production, commercialization, which is great. It's critical, it's needed. I'm a big believer in, like, we need a lot of information to do it really well. You
Yeah.
can't just execute,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so seeing a lot of that white space, Guided Makers is really growing into something where we help the startup understand how to get launched. It's not just about your great idea.
Yeah.
We need you to think about how you're going to sell it. We
Yeah.
need you to think about your investment. We need you to think about your brand, and then we can make it. So this is kind of more of what it's coming out to be in terms of like a larger holistic agency
Yeah.
to help brands at whatever stage, and less about just product development.
Yeah. So you keep mentioning sort of this idea of like building out your networking or network and
Mm.
talking to people and relationships and stuff. And I'd love to, highlight that once more and hear a little bit more of the nuances behind that because you live in Maine. This is not a
Mhm.
fashion hub. It's not like you live in New York City or London or something. And so like and yes, you have, this huge career behind you with all the people that you met along the way. But like, what does this air quote networking look like as you continue to build beyond an independent freelancer to, okay, now I'm starting this agency, this consultancy, Guided Makers, and I've grown it to the extent that like I now outsource to a bunch of other freelancers. It's not as simple
Mhm.
as like, oh, I'm just networking and
Just
talking to
doing it.
people. Like, what does this actually look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. Well, in some respects, it is about talking with people and
Yeah.
networking. It's like, how else do you do it to get your name out there and build those relationships?
Yeah.
And I think to build the relationships, you've got to build trust, right? And so it's baby steps. So a small job to build some trust, to get kind of like your reputation out there is really critically important. And once
Mhm.
somebody has a really great experience with you, then they're happy to send somebody else on.
Yeah.
or they're happy to have a continued conversation with you.
Yeah.
And so it's for me, I'm a believer of like, I sell my greatest asset is myself and my experience, but I don't oversell myself. I don't want to oversell myself. I never want to oversell because if I can't do it, I can't do a great job.
Yeah.
And that for me is not best foot forward. And stay true to what I can do really well. And I think that that comes out in conversations. And the more people you speak with in the industry, they get it and they understand it. And then they immediately build confidence because they can hear about the experience. It's all about sharing that experience and just building that rapport and just getting the name out there. I'll go to trade shows and
Okay.
talk to people.
Yeah.
I'll talk to factories about what are their experiences, what's happening with them. Talk to other freelancers, what's happening, what are your pain points, and let's connect, right? It's
Yeah.
it's okay to connect and it's okay to share.
Yeah.
But a lot of the referrals to date, Guided Makers has been 100% referral led.
That's amazing.
And that is just through conversation or past connections.
Yeah.
I would totally agree if you're younger and greener to the industry, that's more challenging, right? You
Sure.
haven't necessarily got that base built up, but it's really putting yourself out there and talking with people. And like I say, stay true to yourself. What can you do really, really well? How
Yeah.
can you shine
Yeah.
and sell that?
Yeah.
Don't overpromise and underdeliver because
Yeah.
it's a small industry.
It sure is. And it's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah.
It's so small and it's crazy to me. You say like just give the client, the customer a good experience and kind of do what you've promised and do a great job. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think people actually overestimate what it takes to do that. Like it's quite
Mhm.
simple. Do a good job at the thing,
Mhm.
right? Don't overpromise, deliver on
Mhm.
time, and just kind of get
Mhm.
done what you say you're going to get done. But it's kind of surprising. And maybe you've experienced this working with other freelancers. How many people don't actually do that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So going to trade shows, that's great. We have students that have done that with great success. Working with factories is great. We have a couple students who've created these amazing funnels with factories where these factories then just like
Yes.
feed them clients, right?
Yeah.
Amazing
Same. Yeah.
strategy. Yeah. Right. And then any like online platforms, do you utilize LinkedIn just to kind of stay in touch with people, or like, is it pretty much factory, like talking to your resources and the people you're already connected with in the industry?
Yeah. I mean, we leverage LinkedIn and I leverage LinkedIn and social media channels.
Yeah.
I would say social media channels don't really bring in any revenue.
No.
I've like we track all our referrals and
Yeah.
it's like I think in 4 years maybe one person said Instagram.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but you feel like there's a need and
Yeah.
yeah, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Again, it's all about people tapping your name in. Where do you show up, right? You build a credibility and a
Yeah.
trust through your presence. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not where people are finding you.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, absolutely. LinkedIn isn't really about your number one connection. And I might misspeak here because I'm not a guru on LinkedIn, far from it, but it's about your second and third connections. So you really want those second and third connections to be in the thousands, something like 15,000,
Yeah.
because that's your reach. And that's where you can say, oh, do you mind making an introduction? Or,
Yeah.
oh, hey, I saw this. When you see, the more familiar you are with brands, or they may be needing some help, they can help put you in contact with the right people.
Yeah.
So versus just being kind of like out there,
Yeah.
it's saying, oh, my friend so and so is connected to that hiring manager that's posted on LinkedIn that is struggling finding so and so. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's like just playing with that a little bit versus just at the surface level for sure.
Okay. I love that.
But LinkedIn, yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way. And if there was any social to invest your time in, that would be the one.
Yeah, I would agree with you completely. So have you done that strategy where you've sort of like seen this brand through like a second or third connection that's trying to fill this role or something, and then you have asked your contact, that strategy you just outlined? Have you done that and gotten connections?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Okay.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. And then you can connect with those people and start that dialogue.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily always convert,
Sure, sure,
right?
sure.
Not everything, you're never going to have 100% conversion rate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but absolutely, I've been
Yeah.
like, I see they need this, and then I'll be like, we used to work there. Who's the person I really want to speak to? And they'll
Yeah.
say, this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Absolutely. That's what it's there for. That's what it was
Yeah.
always there for. It was to
Yeah.
make the connections
Yeah.
and allow for introductions. And I do it for others too. If I see
Yeah.
somebody saying they need somebody,
Yeah.
I'll reach out to somebody I know to say, you need to speak to so and so.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Okay, so many tangible strategies for like how you've actually gotten
yeah,
clients and built this all out. Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah,
want to talk
sure.
about like the freelancer side of things. So you
Hmm.
as I don't know how to label you the hiring manager per se. I guess that's kind of like the generic bucket to
Yeah,
put you in, right? But
yeah.
you hire other freelancers. And so
Hmm.
people who are listening to this or watching this who are freelancing, I would love to make this a really amazing learning opportunity for them. So, first, what is your process typically for hiring freelancers? I think you said earlier you have just like kind of reached out or connected with them. I know we mentioned, oh, this is before we
Hmm.
started recording, but one of my students, Allison Haynes, you reached out to her to see about possibly
Hmm.
outsourcing some projects to her.
Hmm.
What's your process for like bringing a new freelancer on?
Yeah, so it varies, right? It could be a referral itself, or it could be seeing somebody. I think Allison I'd seen on LinkedIn and I was
Mhm.
intrigued.
Yeah.
She's done some good posts, seems really succinct in the messaging, really clear in what she does.
Yeah.
And it was just like for me, it was like, oh, okay, this is somebody to connect with. As a freelancer, you like, I'm incredibly shy. And I like the concept of reaching out to people is not my number one thing to do. All. And
Wild.
but oh,
Wild the
oh
career
wow.
you've built with that
Yeah.
characteristic.
Oh, the thought of picking up the phone and cold calling or yeah, it's like it's not comfortable at all.
Yeah.
However, over the last few years, definitely grown in that, and it's a means to an end. It's part of the job. And
Yeah.
freelancing and having an agency or it's contracts and contracts. There's no continuous influx, right, of
Yeah.
revenue. So you have to do that, and that's a skill set you really have to be comfortable with and grow.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I do. I see people that are out there. If it's clear messaging, if they seem polished in what they're putting out there,
Mm.
I'm comfortable then to say, hey, I'd love to connect with you. Would you like to chat? And they will either come back and say, yeah, I'd love to, or no. And Alison was actually like saying, yeah, I'm following you. I'd like to chat with you too. So chances are everybody likes to talk, 100%. Everybody wants to talk and share their story. Yeah, so 99% people that you reach out to will want to chat and share their story. They want to connect. Anybody who's on LinkedIn, for example, it's all about connection. People aren't just hanging out on LinkedIn to look at the photos, right? It's about driving business. So, so it's like, so be bold, put yourself out there. I'd love to talk to you. I would be happy with freelancers to call me to say, I'd
Yeah.
love to learn more.
I was going to
I'd be
ask,
happy. Yeah.
do they reach
Like
out?
I'm forever seeking out. Rarely, rarely.
Wow.
Um,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So, and I'm not the only, big in town. There's plenty of apparel development companies.
there are.
And so freelancers can be calling them and say, how are you structured? Do you have a need?
Yeah.
Right? You have to sell yourself. People
Yeah.
aren't always going to come and find you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so my way of looking is using these tools, or it might be a referral, or if somebody used to reach out to me, I'd have a
Okay.
conversation. I did have somebody reach out the other day,
Yeah.
and that was a great conversation. Great. I was like, wow, okay, awesome. You're in
Yeah.
my database. I have nothing right now, but you're in my database.
I
And
love
if
it.
I need that,
Yeah.
I will call you. So yeah, and the other thing I'm just going to say is I mentioned it earlier is don't oversell yourself.
Talk
Too
about that a little more.
many,
Yeah.
Yeah, too many will say, oh, I can do that, or I have done
Mm,
that, or yeah, that's fine. And we'll get into the project and it's not going to work. It's not a
mm,
good fit. They're not quite sure. The lack of confidence to get through it. Well, I've never actually done this, or this isn't
mm,
new. And that is a problem because if I have an employee on board, there's an element that I'm happy to train, and that's part of being an employee. As a
mhm,
freelancer, I'm not here to train.
mm.
I'm here for the services, and we
Yeah,
pay you for your services, for
yeah,
what you offer.
yeah,
And so that's when it becomes very sticky. And it also then impacts on whomever's business or agency you're working with,
yeah,
because it's a trickle onto the client. And, we rate ourselves very highly in terms of a full service
yeah,
and good level of service. And if one of those freelancers actually can't do the job, it becomes very challenging all around.
yeah.
So
And
never
it falls back
oversell.
on you.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay.
Um,
So you said two things that I want to learn a little bit more about. You said when you're looking out there for other freelancers, you look for two things. One, where you've mentioned specifically with Allison, she's very succinct in her messaging and what she does, and
mhm.
presents herself in a very polished way. So I'd love for you to expand on both of those things, succinct and polished.
Yeah, so succinct. It's just a direct message. It's just really clear. I could tell she was an awesome technical designer, pattern maker, and the way she delivers it is really polished. So she may put out a video, or her post on LinkedIn, for example, may just be just a couple of sentences, which if you're in the industry, you're like, oh, she gets it. So
Just the words
she
she's
gets,
using and how she's speaking.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
and how she's speaking. And so to me, it's demonstrating experience
Mm-hmm.
and on the same wavelength, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to work with people who kind of understand our way of working too. Like I say, we're very holistic. We don't jump into product development until we know a certain number of things about a brand, or to be brand.
Yeah.
Um, and if that resonates with a freelancer or somebody else who we may be working with, then they understand that process. There are other agencies that, excuse me, will just jump into product development.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's how you work and not part of the big picture, then maybe it's not a great fit.
Yeah.
Right? It's just
Yeah.
like, I just want to get it done and move on. And some of those projects don't really work like that for us. We want to create a team.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So, what I think I'm kind of trying to extract out of you with the succinct thing, just because this is something I see come up with freelancers a lot,
mhm,
and I try to teach them the opposite of that. Like you said, Allison, she's very savvy as a technical designer, pattern maker. She specifically does women's.
yeah.
It's just very clear, like who she is, what she does, and who her customer is. Versus
Mhm,
the opposite of that might be the freelancer who's kind of like, I can do this and I can do that and I can do all the cajillion
right,
things, right? Like
right.
just sort of trying to grasp at anything versus like,
Hmm.
no, this is my zone of genius and this is what I focus on. Is
Right,
that fair to
right.
say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, like I say, just at a glance, you know who she is and what she can do.
Hmm.
And that fills you with confidence. For
Yeah.
me, it fills me with confidence. People also don't have time to weed through and to
Yeah.
dig deep,
Yeah.
to try to figure out what they do.
Yeah.
Right? You need to be something, if you are leveraging LinkedIn, for example, you just
Yeah.
need to be very clear. People are busy. It's like the same mentality as all the other social media channels. How do you capture somebody's attention?
Yeah.
And Alison certainly had done that for me, and I'd seen her come
Yeah.
up a few times.
Yeah.
So yeah, so reaching out. So yeah, it's just clarity, just real clarity. The other thing on LinkedIn too is like you see who people are connected with.
Mm,
And if you have the right connections in the industry, not right, but sufficient or mutual,
mm-hmm.
that adds confidence.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Yeah.
dear listener, Be very clear about who you are and your services as a freelancer. Look polished. You need to show that you know what you're talking about. And also don't be afraid to reach out, right? To Rachel or to other people. Like I always tell people this. There are, agencies like yourself or brands that like really want the person to do the thing. And there's not a great, we've got like Upwork and stuff, but I don't feel like there's a great sort of matchmaking system. So
Right.
there's tremendous amount of opportunity when you present yourself right.
Right.
Okay. So that's great. Some really awesome insights there, Rachel. I'd love to know, how do you work with freelancers? Are they in touch with the clients working directly, or does everything channel through you and you're the touch point for the client? Like, what does that look like from a logistics side?
So I would say every client and project is different.
Okay.
Every single one is different.
Okay.
So, but a good example is one that we're doing in swimwear right now, and that technical designer is in touch with the client.
Okay.
I don't really believe in being a middleman. I let the expert speak to the client. This is where I have to have the trust, right? And they know, do you know what you're doing, and can you manage this?
Which is a little scary sometimes.
It's a
Because it's
little
your client
scary,
at the end of
right?
the day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really important. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be in the middle and always translating. There are times where myself or there will be product developers here that are managing that project that will maybe like step in or have some extra questions or work with them on maybe tech pack update and things like that.
Yeah.
But I want the client and the technical designer, for example, or a designer, to be speaking with the client. I think that's really important. It's part of the team.
Okay.
We have a team eyes on your product. That's really important. I talk about holistic all the time. So it should be as many people as possible to get that product and brand launch right.
Yeah.
If if somebody's working on a Shopify website, they're part of that team. They're going to know what technical design is doing, and they're going to know what PD is doing from a timeline perspective. So it all goes hand in hand. There are times where a freelancer is not working at all with the client. And we've recently had to do a whole bunch of sketches, just take all this product and put it into sketches.
Okay.
Right? They don't need to communicate with the
Totally.
client.
They're just drawing a bunch of flats.
Right?
Yeah.
They're just doing all the flats and they're just working with the team here, and that gets done.
Okay.
So yeah, depends on the client, depends on the project and the needs. But if we're really truly developing product, being part of that conversation is important.
I'd love to hear, because we have a lot of freelancers in our community who are at capacity with their work and who are, they still want to bring on more clients, but they're just like, I'm booked out, months in advance and I can't do it. And they want to sort of start outsourcing and building maybe something out like an agency like you have logistically. And you don't have to share exact numbers if you don't want to, but like, how do you figure out the pricing for like, okay, here's what I'm quoting the client for the project, right? And then how do I budget in to then outsource part of that to a freelancer, whether that's an hourly rate to the freelancer or like a project rate, to make sure that at the end of the day, you still need to make money and you're still the one that got the client in the first place. And even if that, technical designer, PD, what have you, is in direct contact, you're still managing the project and still have the whole relationship. Like, and I imagine there was some learning curve to that, but like,
yeah, it's a continual learning curve.
Okay.
I'm going to say, it's, but so when working with a freelancer, for example, I'll know their rates. And then depending on how the project is with the client, we'll talk about whether it's an hourly or a fixed rate.
Okay.
And then with that becomes the markup for back to guided makers. So as with any agency, if you're freelancing to them, they're always going to take your rate and mark it up.
Yep.
And that's what comes back in. To your point, we found the client, we're managing the business.
Totally.
We're doing it. You're not out getting sales. We're doing the sales job, right? So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how it's working.
Yeah.
Um, for with freelancers.
Yeah.
We're here always trying to figure out the best way
Yeah.
to bill out to clients. It can be hourly, it can be fixed rate. Just I keep coming back to this word of trust
Yeah.
and learning and relationships. Typically, to start out, we'll go with hourly rates because we don't know the client. We don't know
Yeah.
how they work. We don't know
Yeah.
how they operate. It's not black and white. Project development is not black and white, and it can take a long time. There's lots of
Yeah.
curveballs, and we get off track and come back on. And depending on the client and the product, understanding all of that through an hourly rate is probably more sustainable. It is more sustainable as a business before the longer term relationship is like,
Yeah.
okay, now we can move into fixed rate because we totally understand each other
Yeah.
and this is how we're going to move it. And
Yeah.
then as a business perspective, it's easier to manage. But I definitely found initially hourly is the way to go.
Yeah. I always suggest people start hourly. And
Mm-hmm.
then in my career, I actually never did hourly, for a long list of reasons, but some clients get a little resistant to it, right? Because they're like, well, and I think it's just a matter of how you pitch it,
Right.
right? It's like, okay, well,
Right.
we estimate it's going to take, X hour between,
Mm-hmm.
5 and 10 hours or 5 and 8 hours, what have you, 10 to 20. And then just keeping them in the loop, like, right, building that relationship, the trust of like, okay, here's where we're at. And like, this is what we've got done. And if they keep giving you a bunch of revisions and revisions and revisions, just having an open
Right.
dialogue about that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like you have now figured out some sort of system, again, constant learning process, but like if the
Mhm.
freelancer is $50 an hour, then you're saying, okay, 50 times X, like some type of markup. That's what you're actually
Mm-hmm.
charging to the client.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned earlier something that is a challenge with working with freelancers is when they sort of oversell themselves of like, yeah, I could do that. Right. And then you get deep in the project and it's like, ugh. What are some other challenges that you've had with freelancers that you've hired during any part of the process? Like that just kind of, if you could teach all the freelancers out there some lessons or give them some tips and advice, like what has been your experience, good and bad?
So the good, start with the good.
Okay.
Because there's not a lot of bad, but let's
Oh,
start with the
great.
good.
Okay.
Yeah, so the good is, and it's the same rules for us a little bit. Like you want your client to feel like they're the only client. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like you want them to be, there's boundaries, but responsive, on it, open to conversation. If we're having a technical issue here, they will get on the phone and work through it with
Yeah.
them, like on the tech pack, for example. Just really open and collaborative and responsive.
Yeah.
That's great because you all want to work with people like that. The more the negatives are, well, that's how I got it.
What do you mean?
Or, statements of like, well, that's how I got it. So that's how you're going to keep it, right? Versus like,
Oh,
I've
like if,
asked you for your expertise. And it's like, well, you gave it me that way. So I'm not going to do anything with it. And it's like, well, okay, but we're not hearing your expertise. Or
like, give
it's
me an
always a bit of
example. Like if you give them a tech pack and they're like,
a hack or a
okay.
pattern, and they're
Ah,
like, there's always a bit of a blame. Well, not always, but some
mm,
can be a bit of a blame, like, well, that's what you gave to us. And we'll
okay.
be like, yes, but your role here is to improve on that, or fix it, or
Okay.
change it, or provide a recommendation,
Okay. To speak up
right?
and say, like, here, we could do this better, not just, well, I don't know, this is what they gave me, so this is what we're going to use type of attitude.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
So that is when it becomes challenging and not, not necessarily fun to work with because
Mm,
it's like then you're having to draw out like what is that recommendation or what shall we do from here? So
yeah.
that is when it becomes a bit of a challenge, but that is where I think it kind of goes hand in hand with maybe a bit of the oversell that they're not necessarily
Mm,
going to be able to provide a solution. So that's just like one thing. So it's for me, it's really about that team, that openness, that willingness, that responsiveness, a thorough email
yeah.
is great. Um, It's just really important versus just a one line or really disjointed. The communication is really important too.
Yeah.
So you've got to remember, the way I see it is like freelancers, you're selling your expertise. So it has to come through. You know what I mean? It's like I want to see it. We're paying for it. And so we want to see that come through. And that's why we're working with you, because we believe in your expertise.
Yeah. Do you ever have any challenges? Just because I've hired a lot of freelancers in my various businesses,
Mhm.
and two big challenges that come up for me is just people delivering what they say they're going to deliver and doing it on time. And
Mhm.
then also, and especially at the very beginning, is being very communicative about like, here's where I'm at, here's the status of the project. This is something that makes me a little bit like, right? Is like, you hire this freelancer and the project, let's say, is going to take them a week, right? And you like don't really hear from them, and you're kind of like, well, are they doing it? I
Mm.
don't know. Oh, is it getting done? And then like
Right.
very last minute, and that sort of relationship doesn't work for me. I'm the kind of then they're gone. I can't work with that kind of person. But I don't want to have to like
Yeah.
mid project be like, hey, how's it going? Like, are you making any progress? Do you have any questions? Like, where are we at with this? Especially when you've got a client on the other side who's reliant on this. You don't want to wait to
Yeah.
that very last minute to find out they didn't do it or they didn't do it right. And then you're like, okay, well, now I have to either explain that to my client or frantically pull an all-nighter to figure this out or pay some other freelancer
Right.
double, right? Like those
Right.
sort of situations. And some of it feels like really common sense to me. But I've
Hmm.
learned over the years that a lot of people don't work that way. They're fine with
Hmm.
just like getting it done, doing no check-ins, and then barely delivering it on time, which gives me a
Yeah.
lot of
No.
anxiety.
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point. I've definitely worked with some of those folks. They're the folks that I then shift what work they would get in the future.
Mm,
I don't work well like that either.
yeah,
We're pretty clear about timelines here. We will issue a timeline for the client and whomever's working on the project. And
yeah,
the great freelancers will come back and say, "Oh, I'm on vacation that week. Is there any chance we can shift it?"
yeah,
And have those dialogues. So from the outset, you kind of know the ones that are a little quiet are the ones that are going to be less customer facing
yeah,
and be a little bit more in the background, just doing the busy work, and we
yeah,
will manage them accordingly. So we
yeah,
keep an eye on everything
yeah.
according to our timelines and do kind of bug. But
Okay.
yeah, communication is key and
Yeah,
visibility is key on all of that. And like I
yeah.
say, you just don't get a repeat business. And I think it's a good self-check for any freelancer is to ask for feedback.
Hmm.
Ask for feedback. Nobody asks me for feedback.
They
I
do
ask
not.
all I ask all my clients for feedback, and I ask them for feedback halfway through the project too.
Yeah,
And it's like this is no different. If you want to grow, you want to grow your business, you want to get a great reputation,
yeah,
you're evolving
yeah,
all the time, and you
yeah,
will learn all the time. It's happening still for me. I learn all the time.
yeah,
Oh, I could have done that differently.
yeah,
Or, oh, the client said that this was a little confusing.
yeah,
All right, well, we'll change that.
yeah,
It's great feedback. I would say, because we're all blind to our own mistakes or, shortfalls
yeah,
in business or in life. And
yeah,
we don't see or hear it. We
yeah,
just don't. And so you need someone to help you along.
yeah. And it's really as simple as saying, I want to check in, like, how are things going? How are you feeling? Where do you feel things are going well? Like, where do you feel things are maybe feeling a little tough? Like, what feedback do you have? Just asking just those two questions. Where are things going well and what's feeling a little tough, or where are things getting stuck?
Yeah.
And then most people are very happy to share. You just have to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a business owner, I will share because if I think your output is fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
but getting there was painful,
Mm.
I want to keep the output, right? I want like for me, it's about my customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
So I'll be like, yeah, communication, we really need to pick that up and
Yeah.
let's try to improve that going forward.
Yeah.
Or this is what we as a business would need. But yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a big piece of advice. I don't think freelancers ask it enough.
They don't.
And
I agree.
it's difficult to do, and I totally appreciate that.
Sure.
It's a little bit scary, but
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you have, like you said, a database of freelancers that you kind of build out
Mhm,
based on,
mhm.
like you said, providing really specialized services to your various clients. And sometimes that's drawing a bunch of flats. Sometimes that's maybe something really, really technical. Do you have a team as well? Employee team?
Yeah, I have a product developer here.
Okay.
So she works here at Guided Makers
Okay.
as an employee. And then I have another two consultants that come in quite regularly to
Yeah.
help round out our services. So they're not technically employees, but they're in the office.
Okay.
And they are more about that bigger picture look for helping a brand start
Yeah.
a line, but then also existing clients if they need to tap into some of these extended services they can. So
Okay. Gotcha.
yeah, typically 2 to 4 people in the office on any given day, depending on
Okay.
what's on the calendar. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all your freelancers are remote. I mean, maybe if they happen to
Mhm.
live close, they can touch base, but it sounds like pretty much remote.
Yeah, some of them are local actually and can
Okay.
come in maybe for a fitting or a design review.
Yeah.
So always encourage that.
Yeah.
Working around a table is great. There
Yeah.
is no replacing that.
Yeah.
But everybody else is remote
Yeah.
and Zoom and Teams, it all works great.
You
I
figured out.
encourage people to, if they have Teams or they subscribe to Microsoft,
Yeah.
that's great for me as a business owner. I have
Yeah.
everybody on IM. We're chatting all the time. Hey, did you know this is another thing about breaking down? Like, did you get to it yet? Or
Yeah.
they can't access a tip pack and
Yeah.
we'll change the setting,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Mhm.
It's great. It's about ease of communication is key as well.
Yeah. And are most of your freelancers in the US or do you have people internationally as well?
No, domestic US.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Is there a reason for
Yeah.
that or just by chance?
I think it's by chance. Definitely been speaking to people in Canada,
Okay.
but haven't worked with anybody outside of North America from a
Okay.
freelance, but it's
Okay.
totally doable though.
Yeah, it is totally doable. Yeah. A lot of our students work with people around the globe.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Rachel, this has been so fantastic. So many great, like actionable insights and lessons that people can use to build their own agency or consultancy and also get more clients and, plenty of opportunities for those freelancers to work with agencies like you or the other ones that are out there. I
Yeah.
really appreciate your time and sharing. I'd love to end with the question I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, which is, what is one thing people never ask you about working in the fashion industry that you wish they would?
Gosh, that's a good one. Is it
It's,
glamorous?
yeah, okay.
No, it's not. A lot of people think it's really glamorous and
They
like,
do,
oh
I know.
wow, clothes and fashion and da 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 da
Runway and
da. Yeah. And it's like, no, not
not at
so
all.
glamorous,
Yeah,
but it can be a lot of fun. And once you've got it in your bones and in your system, it's very difficult to step away.
yeah,
And that must be for a reason. It's just
yeah,
because it's like, I don't know, there's an energy, and the energy is there for sure.
yeah.
And it's what keeps me in it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.